Hello, everyone. As some of you may know me, probably mostly from yesterday, some of you may not, but as Simon's just said, my name's Bruce. I'm the porting supervisor here at Simwood. Considering my job is pretty much knowing as much as I can to do with porting, I thought when I was asked to do a presentation, porting's probably the best thing to do it on. So when I say presentation, I'm hoping this is more of a kind of discussion. I'm kind of hoping to hear a little bit about what you guys think. Any questions that you guys have, I'm more than happy to try and answer them, and that might fill up the time a bit for me. But anyway, might as well start with the kind of easy, kind of very broad question of what is porting? Porting, in a very simple way of explaining, is moving any amount of numbers from one provider to the next. On face value, you kind of go, well, that can't be that difficult. If you're just moving one number from one place over here, that should only really be one kind of drag and drop and it's done. That's what I thought when I joined, until I realized about the rules and regulations, about the paperwork that goes into it, about all of the outdated processes that seem to still be in place, alongside just about 50 other hurdles. So if you were thinking that it's quite an easy process up until now, I can guarantee you this time tomorrow, might have a different thought in your head. But the way I think would be easy to describe porting in a sense, if we start on a very, very basic level of how a phone call is made. A lot of people, especially outside of the telecoms world, they'll think, oh, okay, I'll take my phone, I'll call a number, and then in their head they're going, right, I've got a direct link from my phone to that other person I was talking to. That's not quite true. The initial person calling, as soon as they've hit that call button, that's going straight up to their communication provider. That provider is sat there with one question going, well, do I know where this number's going? If I know where this number's going, if I know it's on my network, brilliant, I'll just send it over there. 9 out of 10 times that's not the case. They've got this number, they're going, well, it's not one of mine, so I'll just send it off to the range holder. The range holder is the provider that acquired this number to begin with. They have the kind of be-all and end-all, if you like, of that number. So you'd like to think they would know where that number is at any given time. When they get that call, they see that call, they go, okay, well, that's being prefixed over to Simwood, so let's route that number over there, and then at that point we can go, right, okay, here you go, there's the end user, bam, call's established, everything's working fine. On the other side, if we were the caller's provider as well, we don't even need to speak to the range holder. We can go, oh, okay, we've received a call, we know where that call's going, let's just do it. Why even bother the range holder with that information? In that sense, that is what's classified as an on-net call, because it's just staying on our network. As soon as it goes to the range holder, that is now an off-net call. That is going to different networks, might take a little bit longer, there could be a few issues down the line, but that is the standard supply chain for any given phone call. Now, so with that in mind, with the idea of how a phone call is made, I'm going to start getting into the bit of technical side of things with actually porting numbers. Porting numbers, we generally speak to 3 different groups, as it were. Or I should say there's 3 different groups involved, we're one of them. We have the losing communication provider, we have the gaining communication provider, and we have the range holder. All 3 groups need to be aware of this number port taken just happening. That's a better way to say it. The losing provider, they have one key responsibility, and that is to remove the routing that they have on that network for that number. There's not too much to do there, it is just removing it. On the range holder side of things, they have one main thing to do. They apply a prefix, they go, okay, that call no longer needs to go over here, we'll direct that to Simwood. Again, all they need to do. The gaining communication provider, and what I seem to spend a lot of my time doing, is calling and making sure that the range holder have actually applied that prefix and the losing provider have actually removed their routing. As soon as any of these steps aren't done correctly, that's where we have a problem. If we've spoken to the range holder, we've said, okay, apply that prefix, send that number to us. I'll call back an hour later and they go, we've already done that. I'm saying, no, you haven't. We're sat here, we're making phone calls, we're looking at it in front of us. Nothing's hitting our network. And then I generally get the response, yeah, we prefixed it to 00000. I'm thinking, great, did you delete our prefix? I think they did. And then about 20 minutes later, where they go, oh, let's use the actual prefix, everything's working fine. On a similar side to the losing provider, we'll call them up in the morning, try and get everything processed as quickly, as smoothly as we can. Everything sounds good. They've gone, yeah, we've removed that, we've removed the routing, everything's fine. When I see a ticket from any one of you going, got a bit of a weird one here, any call I make over BT, it's not connecting. I go, right, okay, I think I know what's happened here. And then I'm back on the phone to the losing provider going, well, you've told us you've removed it. I don't think you have. There seems to be a lot of checking, not only our work, but other providers' work as well, to make sure that everything is actually in place. Note that I've said 3 main groups, as it were, importing. These are the groups we're interested in. When it gets to a difficult porting scenario, this is what seems to happen. We're sat there and we've gone, okay, we've sent our porting request. We know what's going on with that porting request. We can see up to here. In fact, in a sense, we can't even see this bit. We can assume that bit. Everything else between the wholesale provider and the end user, completely oblivious on. There can be one reseller in that chain. There could be 50. So just out of curiosity, how many people in here have ever raised a ticket or sent a phone call in going, can we get an update on this port, please? So just over half of you. When the geographic handbook says it should take 24 hours for a single line, I can almost guarantee 24 hours we're going to be about here. So when there's plenty of resellers to go through, this is why it can take a lot longer than it necessarily should. From our side of things, I'm more than happy to call that provider. I am more than happy to do so at every given point of the day. But that's the only route I've got to the end user. Every now and again, you might get a reply on one of your emails going, is there any chance you can give the end user a little bit of a nudge here? Because doing that way, we can start chasing it from the other side as well. We can start sandwiching that reseller who's holding on to that porting request and not doing anything with it. So this is why, although a porting request, as stated, should take 24 hours for a single line, I'm just going to throw that out there, it doesn't necessarily just take 24 hours. But taking away that chaos, coming back to a simple life a little bit, this is how we expect a number port to take place. We are expecting the end user to initiate the porting request. The end user is going, okay, I know who I want my new provider to be. I know who my current provider is. Those are the two people that the end user stay in contact with. On the top side of the wholesale side of things, we stay in touch with you as the gaining party and the losing provider, trying to find a way so they're happy to let that number go and let that number come to us. It's a good idea bearing this in mind. We will be coming back to that later on, but in a slightly different aspect. But to carry on, I'm going to go through a very interesting handbook. The reason I've said the secret porting handbook is I don't think many providers out there even know of its existence. It's a very important document. You can see its very nice title there, the MPP and CG being the number porting policy and commercial group. They're quite a big thing. This is the handbook. All providers, when it comes to porting, they are looking through this and making sure they are following this as closely to the letter as is possible. Now, I am purely going to talk about geographic numbers here, because I think if I started to introduce non-geographic numbers, mobile numbers, international numbers, US numbers, I don't think we've got enough time in the day for that. So, as far as geographic number portability is concerned, all of porting relates to this handbook. It's only 60 pages, though it does have about 30 odd appendices of every different avenue that you want to take, but everything is there. Note that most of this is classified as guidelines. The providers that are aware of this tend to pick and choose a little bit of what is necessarily applicable. The 24-hour guide, for example, we're able to stick to that. There are providers out there that are able to stick to that guideline, and that's what we do. Many out there, I don't want to name any names just yet, they can take over 2 weeks just to process one single line request, generally after it's already ported and they're still sat there going, wait, did we do this? You never know. But it can take a long time. With respect to this, with other documentation like, for example, letters of authorization, I'm sure I may have sent a message, or the porting team may have sent you a message going, this is going to sound stupid, but can you number the pages for me? It sounds like a very petty, tiny little insignificant detail, but the amount of letters we've had rejected saying, well, we don't know if that's the same document. We need you to put a nice little 2 in the corner so we can confirm they're the same document. That's because this is in here. That's because in the appendices of the handbook, that's what the letter of authorization needs. So it can be petty, but I can guarantee you there is a very good reason for us doing that, and that's so we don't have to charge you twice. That's the bottom line when it comes to the LOA. But on a nice note, when it comes to porting, everything's logical. Everything is methodical. Everything has a process. And if that process just remained there, and that process we can just follow to the letter, everything would be fine. What this handbook doesn't provide is when someone makes a mistake. If we get an incorrect rejection, someone comes back to us and says, no, that number's not with us. Okay? We spend a couple of days jumping round provider to provider until we find out the number was with them at the very start. That's not great. So that's what we try to make sure doesn't happen. So every rejection we get, we will check it, because we cannot take their word on those rejections. Nothing in there about incorrect rejections, nothing in there about incorrect acceptances. It happens, we get an acceptance, it comes to the day of the port, and they go, well, I don't remember that. Again, what can we do? They've got charge of the number, they're the ones that are able to prefix it. If they don't want to, then what can we do? I can't just shout on the phone until they do it. It's not quite as easy as that. So yeah, there are mistakes that happen straight away, very obvious, everyone can see. There are mistakes that slip under the radar until it's time to port, and then it's an avalanche. Then everything seems to kind of tumble down on that side. But as fun as talking about that handbook is, and I'm sure you all seem to be very interested in that handbook, it's a beautiful document. But moving on from that for the moment, I am going to take a tiny amount of time to speak about wholesale porting. Wholesale porting, I'm sure quite a few of you may have seen our blog posts, may have seen it kind of dotted around the place all over Simwood's websites. We have a very obvious view when it comes to wholesale porting. Just so everyone's aware, in basic terms, wholesale porting is where the current provider for a number remains in the supply chain. So that is, when that number's ported, it ports, but you are still the provider of that number. That's a wholesale port where the end user might not really know what's going on. Porting is fundamentally there for the end user. The end user is the one who initiates the port. The end user is the one that can stay in contact with the gaining provider, the one that stays in contact with their losing provider, the one who might not know who the range holder is, but that information's publicly available. We don't need to worry about that. So, on that note, if, for example, we have a Simwood number that's wanting to port, by Simwood number, I mean Simwood are the range holder for that number. They are the be-all and end-all. They know where that number's going. They know what they're doing with that number. At the moment, whilst those numbers are on our network, you're paying us for that channel for that call. Easy life. As soon as that number ports away, you're not paying us for that anymore. Okay, but we now have two channels open for that number. We now have a channel dedicated to the inbound side of that and a channel dedicated to the outbound side of that. So that's double the cost for none of the revenue forever. It's a difficult scenario to kind of get your head around, but at the end of the day, all that's doing is losing money in the long run. And if that's not initiated by the end user, if that's not benefiting the end user, then why should that continue? That's where our stance on wholesale porting has come from. Our stance on wholesale porting has always been looking at the costs. It's all about getting rid of unnecessary costs, costs that we don't need to be completing. When it comes to subsequent portability, it's a little more lenient. We still obviously don't condone wholesale porting. Porting is there for the end user. But if it's a Simwood number, I can guarantee you I'm going to be sat in front of my computer investigating that to no end. Wholesale porting is a very important situation. But when it comes to subsequent portability, we're not losing money when that number's gone. There's a administrative cost at the time of processing it, but that's about it. If that number needs to go, we shouldn't get in the way. We don't need to stop that. But having said that, as soon as the slightest doubt has come across to think that's not the end user, that is not the end user doing that, we will look into that. That needs to be looked into. One thing I should mention, I'm making my point on wholesale porting. I'm explaining our policy on wholesale porting. There are so many providers out there with exactly the same views as us. I say exactly the same views. A lot of them have harsher views than us. Where we say we're more lenient on subsequent ports, others aren't. The only difference between us and those providers, we're open about it. We're transparent about it. We will tell you exactly how we feel and exactly what wholesale porting is, what needs to be done, everything that you can do. Other providers out there will just go, no, that was rejected. No, you can't port that number. They don't give much of a reason behind it. That's their reason. It's a wholesale port. They're scared to lose money. They don't want to tell you. But all in all, wholesale porting is abusing the already broken system that is porting. I say already broken. It just about works. That's as far as you can say when it comes to porting. But to paint more of a picture on wholesale porting, I'm going to show you two diagrams. The one we've spoken about earlier, this is how a porting request should take place. The end user has a choice. You, new provider, that's it. Now, when it comes to wholesale porting, there's one key difference in this supply chain. You. If you are remaining, like I've mentioned, in the supply chain, that geographically is how we conceive a wholesale port. So, we have had, thankfully not successfully, some customers may join Simwood. They'll join, get to the point where, yes, we can port numbers. Let's allocate 200 Simwood numbers to us and then take them elsewhere. That is the biggest case of wholesale porting that we do not want happening. We do not need to let happen, and we are very good at stopping that from happening. Wholesale porting is a very big, very, very big issue. I'm sure you can see where my stance is on that. So, to take a slight different turn, I'm going to talk about different types of numbers. These are three of many numbers that you can have with us. Simwood numbers, to start off with. They are easy to allocate. 90% of them, in fact, probably more than 90%, are free to allocate. They're quick. You can just get on with them, throw them on the portal, throw them, I would say through the API, but I'm not 100% confident. I think that would be the case. But yeah, you can deal with Simwood numbers however you wish. The only issue with Simwood numbers is if that number is going to port away, there may be a chance we'll need to look into that a bit closer. That purely depends on how that port takes place. Okay, ported numbers. Ported numbers, the end user has had their number for a very long time. They don't want to get a new number. They want to keep that number. So they can port that number into Simwood, remain on that number, and carry on as normal. Again, if these numbers need to go, it's a subsequent port. There's no necessary ongoing costs. We can let that happen. The third type of number, which is a very interesting aspect when it comes to numbering, is hosted numbers. If you have the ability to acquire your own ranges from Ofcom and you decide to host them with us, happy days. We're able to process with exports on your behalf, if you so wish. In that case, may not be charged for exports. Again, easy to allocate. They're your numbers. You can do what you wish within reason. They share many similarities with Simwood numbers, with one extra benefit. If, for whatever reason, you do decide to going to change my wholesale provider, with hosted numbers, you're not going to be up against me. That's the bottom line. That's not a wholesale port. They are your numbers. They are your numbers. And if they're going to get re-hosted with another provider, that's not porting. I can just wash my hands of that, and you guys do with that what you wish. On that side of things, on that note, as much as I welcome questions, and I'm more than happy for any of you to jump out with anything you want, when it comes to hosted numbers, I would highly recommend speaking to Fraser. He is very intelligent with regards to the hosted numbers side of things. He will be able to explain to you probably in a better sense than I ever could. So, that's different types of numbers. There's an interesting aspect of porting of what could go wrong. What could go wrong? You're just moving numbers. Let's say, and I will ask, how many of you here, you've had a multi-line porting request. You only wanted one number, but you've been told, no, you need to take 20 or 10 or 50. How many of you have had that? Okay, just a couple. That seems to be quite an ongoing, in fact, quite a growing situation where the end user may only be aware of one of those numbers, or they only may wish to port one of those numbers. But the way ports get processed, they have to export their current provider the same way they were imported in the first place. So if that means they came over in a set of 20, they need to go out again in a set of 20. Now, as much as the magnitude, as much as the amount of numbers doesn't matter, imagine you had to port 170 numbers. The end user wanted 160. Okay? That's 10 numbers there that you don't really need to do much with. The last thing we would hope for you to do, the last thing we want you to do with those 10 is allocate them to a different end user. We've seen this happen, we've had this happen, where now we've got 160 numbers with one group and 10 with another. That gets into an awkward situation when that customer with 10 wants to leave. I'll get an export request, I'll go through that and go, okay, they're missing 160 numbers off this, so that's not a good start. As soon as that request comes back with all 170 numbers, we'll let you guys know you've got an export request. Just so you're aware, these are the numbers that are being requested. Now, every now and again, we might get that response back from you going, 170, I was only wanting 10 of them to go. At that point, it's quite late, but we can still do a little bit to try and fight back, request less of authorizations, look at what we can do to make sure everyone stays happy. The awkward side is when that email is ignored or that email isn't read. We will still need to get back to their provider with a response. If we don't have a reason to reject that response, if we don't have a reason to reject that request, we've got to accept it. So, in one case, that's what we did. Accepted that request, didn't get a response from the customer. Send that back to the provider. All is happy, all happy days. On the day of the port, everything was going swell, ported those numbers, and about 2 hours later, phone call. Simwood, 160 of our numbers have stopped working. Great, okay. Which numbers? It's the numbers that we've exported about 20 minutes ago. In that situation, we have got 170 numbers over in one place. They're happy because they're keeping those 10 people happy. We've got 160 people on our side now who are they're out of service. They're not getting the service they were. That becomes an issue. All of that there was still a lot going on with that situation. ended up going into quite a few technical aspects to try and get those numbers back in the first place. Speaking to the range holder to try and split the range. Any of you who have tried splitting ranges can know sometimes that can be a quick phone call, sometimes that can be still ongoing. Annoyingly, I've got quite a few still ongoing, but hey ho. We took a long time to get those numbers back. When those numbers were back, we were able to get the range holder to split those numbers. We were able to make those 10 people happy, and we were able to keep our 160 people happy. But that could have been avoided if the initial 10 users had their own numbers in the first place. That is one aspect of porting. That is one issue with porting that could go wrong. I could jump through so many different situations. In fact, let's jump through quite a few situations. The range holder, they don't prefix the number to us correctly. They're not hitting our network. Those end users are now out of service. That is the last thing we want. The biggest issue on my side of porting is when an end user is out of service, all the alarm bells are going off. What's gone wrong? What's happened? How do we get them back? That is my number one priority. If it's the range holder not doing their job, thankfully, all I need to do is keep on the range holder's back, keep calling them, keep emailing them until they've done their job properly. The losing provider, if they don't remove that routing, all those calls that are on net, on their side, anything could be happening with those calls. We can't see them. The range holder can't see them. That is purely on the old provider's network, and it shouldn't even be there in the first place. We have many situations with regards to IPEX customers where, I'm not too sure how many here have heard of Scenario 7 and the way Scenario 7 works, apart from broken, thank you. But there's a lot of issues in the way those numbers port. For example, hosted numbers with IPEX, they just can't leave the IPEX platform. They are stuck there. No matter where they go, they are branded with that IPEX brand. Quite a few things we have going on is regarding the range holder who have the be-all and end-all of numbers. We've had a number ported to us for, 3 years, and all of a sudden, that number's not hitting us. And I'm going, right, what has happened here? I'll call the range holder, and they'll go, oh yeah, sorry, I forgot we were pointing those to you. Let me apply that again. All that's doing is taking those numbers off our network for no reason, no request to. There are so many aspects of porting that change. POV requests. A POV request is where you guys can send us a letter of authorization. We can go through that LOA, make sure everything's fine, send that off, and we can get all the information needed to get a successful port. Now, when we send that port request off with that information, and they say, no, the postcode's not right, I'll go, well, that's the postcode you gave me. They don't often like that response, but that's the issue we have in the porting world, is as soon as there's one tiny mismatch of data, as soon as that postcode has those two numbers switched, that's got a whole other avenue that we need to go down to make sure that's all correct, that's all fixed, before we can carry on and get those numbers ported as expected. Out of the two sides of providers out there, you have big communication providers who will constantly blame any delays on their automated systems. It's got stuck. There's been a problem with our automated systems. I've only had that maybe 20 times a day. Small providers. They can't have issues with their automated systems, they're small. No, they have issues with their backlog that they're working through, which again causes unnecessary delays. So where that handbook has stated 24 to 48 hours, that is very rarely adhered to. Getting acceptances when they've not been processed fully. Very interesting situation where we'll get an acceptance and we've gone, great. We'll keep that, we'll file that away, we'll let you guys know, hey, your port's been accepted. Fantastic. We'll let you know when that port's completed. Gets to the day and they go, oh, I forgot we sent that. We can't do anything. They have the be all and end all of that number. They're the ones that prefix that number. What can we do to fix that? Now, I don't want to kind of end all of this on a kind of negative side of things. So, thinking about all of those issues, there's one thing that I can say to help. When those get rejected incorrectly, when those get accepted incorrectly, when we have an issue for any of those poured-in requests, we're the ones dealing with that. We're the ones sat downstairs in that office on the phone to all of those providers, making sure they've done what they needed to do. We are there fighting them on incorrect rejections. We are fighting them on unnecessary delays. We're fighting them when we catch them in a blatant lie. We are constantly fighting them to make sure that your ports get processed as smoothly and as quickly as they can. So, by all means, drop us an update on a ticket if you need that confirmation. Give us a quick call on the lines. We're more than happy to have a quick chat. But if it's taking that time to respond, if it's taking that time to pick up that call, that's because we're already on the phone to that provider and we're already fighting them. Okay. I know that was a slightly quicker presentation than discussed, but I believe that's me all sorted.
Thank you, Bruce. Any questions on the delights of porting?
Is there any mechanism by which you can, I don't know, tune their arse about it? You know, if they've been caught in a blatant lie, how are they answerable for that? Is there some process where you can, I don't know, report them to somebody, Ofcom, whoever? Or is it just, that's it, you have to keep at it until it happens?
A lot of it is keeping at it until it happens. There are a few times where it's just a matter of sending email after email, escalating and escalating until they confirm, oh yeah, sorry, I shouldn't have said that. That's generally about as far as it goes.
So I'm thinking like a black mark, you know, against their name. If they get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of these, what happens? You can't just do it endlessly. It seems daft.
Yeah,
I know. But that's great, but...
Yeah, there's a lot of issues in that side of things, and quite a few of those we're actually working on. But unfortunately, even when that's happened and it's obvious and it's happened straight away, it will still take a lengthy time for it to be investigated fully, looked into fully, and a lot of the times never really amounts to anything.
Yeah, I had the feeling you were going to say that.
I can add a bit of colour to that. I think there's
Thank you.
There's two kinds of mistruths, shall we say. There's the big telco that tries to adhere to the process, but recognised some years ago that it was fundamentally broken, costing them far too much money, wasn't going to change. So the solution to all of that is to send it overseas somewhere where we can forget it exists. And that is the way most of the big porting desks work. They run out of India, and you've got a load of Indians running around trying to do their best with a fundamentally broken process, high turnover of staff, often not knowing what they're doing, sometimes not knowing what they're doing. And in that environment, mistakes happen. So that's the one class of mistruths. And I think in that sense, that's just the day-to-day, and that's what our guys spend most of the time on the phone doing. You know, they sit on hold to BT for sometimes hours, get through to somebody who is then only allowed to talk about a given number of given quantity of numbers before the call has to be terminated, and they have to go around that merry dance again. In the case of BT, we have to deal with OpenReach, but we can't speak to IPEX, so we sit on hold to OpenReach, who then sit on hold to IPEX, who are then too busy to speak to them. So there's things like that go on. The other class of mistruths is the one that in the past we have named and shamed, and actually dealt with the resultant litigation, because people don't like being named and shamed. But there's people out there that I affectionately call IPEX scrotes, and I'm quite pleased. It's one of my career achievements that the word scrote has entered regulatory language in the UK. And IPEX scrotes seem to create an impression that the world is IPEX and the old world is anything non-IPEX. Now, part of that is ignorance, part of that is devious marketing. Because the reality is BT does give them the capability to do what they need to do. They just don't know about it, or they deny it exists. And that tends to be where we have most problems. Us, Gamma, Mag, other people that host numbers, and really there's probably only those three of us that host lots and lots of numbers, aside from IPEX. The three of us, we default include numbers that we host in our porting agreements, or we don't default include, but we make it a tickable option that pretty much everybody I can think of opts in for, because the alternative is they have to deal with it themselves. IPEX seems to take the opposite position. Here's all the tools to make it happen, but do it if you want. That could very easily change. But how we've dealt with IPEX scrotes in the past is, Bruce quite often emails the porting handbook, or even emails the IPEX manual to them to tell them exactly where in the portal they need to click to enable this thing that doesn't exist. We've also referred them to Ofcom, which historically has been singly unproductive. In actual fact, I'd go as far as to say it's been counterproductive. Now, that could be my approach to Ofcom, because historically I used to do those. We now have a guy called Pete, who is far more on it from a regulatory point of view, and he is tending to lead complaints to Ofcom, and we're being more effective. And Ofcom, about 9 months ago, did their first investigation to a reseller that wasn't complying with the porting obligations. But rumour has it, should I say, what it took to get Ofcom to care about that was an Ofcom investigator putting a call into him and the reseller telling them to F off. That was a trigger for them being sufficiently annoyed to actually do something. But we hope that has started the ball rolling. We got loads lined up to go in, both against IPEX scrotes, and we have other complaints queued against BT for other regulatory shenanigans. But I think we're preaching to the choir here, and I think was two main points. If I can summarise what you were saying, Bruce, and then we'll sort of take more questions. The one main point is that we're on your side here, and I don't think anybody in this room it applies to, but there's some customers that tend to think the brokenness of porting is entirely our fault, and we must be a bunch of idiots. Neither of those are the case. We're on people's side, and the guys downstairs are doing the best they can with a fundamentally broken process, and we're trying our best to change that process, but unfortunately that requires a regulator that gives a shit about it. At the moment, their solution is to give BT £500,000 to fanny about with blockchain, which will achieve absolutely nothing. It'll enable us to share the central database that we don't have, and won't fix any of the other process issues that that Bruce talked about. But I'm sure we'll get there. In the meantime, we can look at banana republics and admire how efficiently they do things. I think the second takeaway from Bruce's Bruce's talk was don't ever give ported numbers to somebody else. They don't be long, but they are associated with the customer of yours that caused them to port in. If you split them and give them to somebody else, you're in a world of pain. The example that Bruce cited, Rachel spent the best part of 6 months trying to sort out. We started with a flip-flop of the entire range between us, and it was Gamma in that case, because it couldn't exist on both networks. And once one customer had gone one way, one customer had gone another way. We ended up having a formal dispute of ownership of the range, which we won, which resulted in the Gamma customer having no service and having no likelihood of having any service. We then proceeded to try and get BT to split the range such that both sets of customers could have service. And I believe that's still ongoing, isn't it, Bruce?
I think so, yeah.
BT tell Ofcom they can and will split ranges. They tell us they can't and they won't. So between those two statements lies kind of day-to-day arguments and fun and games.
I wouldn't do that. I wouldn't do that, but is there some mechanism by which you can set a flag against a number so people wouldn't do it by mistake to say this is part of a range?
We put a block of numbers on your account for you to route and configure as you see fit. In a partner scenario, you see, it's a bit easier because we have visibility of the customers. In a wholesale scenario, there's a load of numbers that route to your equipment and you do what you will with them. So no, it's not easily resolvable. Any other questions? Dan?
We keep sort of coming back to IPEX and things, and I think, was it last year, Simon, you mentioned about, in inverted commas, joining IPEX to get around some of the issues. Is that still happening, or is it now easier to get numbers out of IPEX?
So it's getting easier to get numbers out of IPEX because there aren't that many IPEX scrotes that we haven't already educated, shall we say. As to us joining IPEX, that's a more complicated answer. Mm-hmm. So we set up the Open Porting Initiative, where we approached peers in the marketplace that appeared to think like we did, and behind closed doors had a resounding lack of any kind of interest in enhancing the ability to port numbers to and between networks easier. Mm-hmm. And that kind of makes sense when you look at the ratio of numbers we port from other providers. There's no provider in the marketplace that ports numbers more from Simwood than Simwood ports from them. And in the case of some of the quite large providers, that ratio is we port tens and tens of times as many numbers from them as the other way round. So I can kind of understand why. And to Bruce's point about policy, where we've got a bit of flack, frankly, for our policy on wholesale porting. And I'll defend it as long as anybody wants to argue with me about it. But because I view wholesale porting as fraud, plain and simple, and it's fraud that costs us money forever. So like any business that wishes to combat fraud, so do we. Some of our peers say nothing, but we have evidence following the SIP-Centric acquisition, where they had numbers with some of our peers, that they have a far harsher policy than we do. Our policy is about cost avoidance. So if you want to commit fraud that's going to cost us money forever, we obviously don't welcome that. Some of our peers take the view, well, if you want to commit fraud and lose me revenue, I'm not going to allow that. We will actually tolerate losing the revenue because, frankly, we'd sooner not have a customer that doesn't want to be a customer than keep the revenue under duress. It's not how we do business. It doesn't happen terribly often, and the kind of people that want to do that tend not to be too nice when they don't get their own way. So it seems sensible to us to allow it to happen where there's not a lifetime cost for us. As to your point originally, sorry, I went off a bit of a ramble then. Your point was us joining IPEX. So one of the things with the Open Porting Initiative was we're going to have this member-owned organisation that can join IPEX and deliver the benefits to all of us that won't join IPEX. At the same time, you have our efforts around the Secret Club that you've probably read about on the blog, and my foot in the door at BT. Now we know the Secret Club exists, and we know the criteria and terms on which we can enter, and we're debating whether I want to be raped or whether we want to play fair. That conversation has been going on for some time. That conversation is probably less than a week away from involving Ofcom. So it's going to get interesting in that respect. Because, well, let's just say it's going to get interesting. However, us joining the Secret Club doesn't help with porting, because joining the Secret Club is simply an IP interconnect to BT. But where I was going with that is we could just join IPEX. But joining IPEX as what they call a Type A customer, a conventional reseller like all the other people are on IPEX, undermines our case for admittance to the Secret Club. So that's not something we've been prepared to do. So we'll continue battling to ensure that everybody using IPEX plays fair, and we're encouraged that the regulator is a little bit more open to that possibility. There's a long, long way to go to get us to having a 21st century fit-for-purpose porting mechanism, and we're not on the right tracks towards that yet. But we'll continue voicing our thoughts and hopefully getting us there.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Oops.
Hang on. Sorry, Fraser. We can do. Yeah. He didn't go into too much detail about it.
So I think it was Graham this morning mentioned about going to be supporting US porting.
Mike's on the other side.
Sorry, yeah. So yeah, I think Graham mentioned about supporting US porting soon. So we've got a customer in the US that's looking to port numbers in about May time when they're out of contract with Windstream. Is that in line with the plans?
We do US porting now.
All right.
We've done a lot of US porting for one of our large customers over there. It just isn't in the portal, I think I'm right in saying.
It is, but there's still some limited functionality because we're trying to streamline it a little bit. So if you do it kind of one by one at the moment, you can use the portal. If you're doing large blocks of numbers, we'll just do it for you.
Yeah. Okay.
There we go. So open a support ticket and we'll work you through it one way or another. But that's absolutely, we can do it. We can do it now.
Yeah. Okay. Great.
And it works far better.
Yeah, I believe so.
Yeah. As does mobile porting, actually. Although Ofcom are wanting to review it and break it. Any other questions? Okay, in which case, Bruce, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.